views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. As the clock struck midnight on New Year's Eve, we ushered in the new year and also opened the gates for new laws in New York, including sweeping criminal justice reform. That means essentially the end of cash bail. Legislators were inspired to move forward on the long debated issue after the tragic suicide of Khalif Browder, who spent 3 years in Rikers Island awaiting trial, 2 of them in solitary confinement. By eliminating cash bail, legislators say they've leveled the playing field, so those without the resources to pay for bail, they get released as they await trial, just like those who can afford it. But tonight's guests are concerned about this new policy because they claim that it can mean letting criminals go free, and it also would essentially destroy the bail bonds industry. It's a thorny issue that has raised the eyebrows of many, and we'll discuss it tonight with a former NYPD lieutenant, Pace University professor, and frequent network news commentator on criminal justice issues. Welcome back to Dr. Darrin Porcher. Nice to have you with us, sir.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
And also joining us on Skype, the president of Empire Bail Bonds, it is Michelle Esquenazi. Nice to have you with us, Ms. Esquenazi. Nice to see you.
Thank you, sir.
Great.
Nice to be here.
Please note for everybody, this is the first of a 2-part series on criminal justice reform, as we'll have Bronx DA Darcel Clark on the program next week to continue the dialogue. But let's get started here in the studio with Dr. Porcher. So here we are, eliminated cash bail for most misdemeanors and nonviolent crimes, keeping monetary requirements for other conditions like violent felonies, anyone committing a violent sex or a sex act against children. They're all subject to bail. Many low-level offenses have been downgraded to desk appearance tickets. Good idea, bad idea? How do you feel?
Well, I think it's problematic because what we have now is we have a double victimization. When I say a double victimization, meaning if someone is the victim of a crime such as an assault 3rd degree, meaning one person punches the other person in the face, that person sustains an injury. They call the police arrive, and they arrest that person. That person can now be out within 3 hours in that same location where they were victimized initially. So it really introduces a narrative that's somewhat questionable and troubling as far as the way I see things as a prior practitioner in the NYPD. Oftentimes I felt that the best recourse was separate people and let's let cooler heads prevail. Oftentimes this would consist of a person, quote unquote, going through the system. When I say going through the system, meaning that individual is arrested at the precinct, that person is arrested on the street, they're brought to the precinct for processing, and then they're transferred to central booking. At central booking, that's when an arraignment judge would make an assessment as to what the bail conditions should be if suited. And then if a person is unable to or doesn't have the ability to attain bail, then they would be sent to Rikers Island. So we look back at what's happening, and there's a streamlining effect that's being driven by criminal justice reform, which I'm a proponent of. However, the criminal justice reform needs to be done smartly, and this is a knee-jerk reaction as a result.
Is there inequitability? Because if somebody commits a violent crime or a sexual crime, I mean, Harvey Weinstein has been used as an example. He's been a sexual predator. He can afford almost any amount of bail. I think he paid $1 million bail, and he spent Christmas with his family. Somebody who may have done the same things has a different financial structure in their lives. They certainly couldn't afford $1 million bail, and they're going to sit in in a terrible place in Rikers Island. Isn't that inequitable?
You bring out a great point, and that's something that the masses appear to be attaching to. But you have to look to the socioeconomically impoverished communities, which are primarily African American and Latino. These communities are under siege, and oftentimes the offenders come from these same communities. We still need to take effective provisions in connection with if we're going to arrest these people, fine, we arrest them. And when I say these people, meaning people that live in these communities of color, we arrest these people, and it's important that we put them through the system, because if that person is not able to make bail, because it also sets forth a precedence. That precedence is, look, there's a level of accountability attached to your actions. By removing that level of accountability and removing bail, we no longer have that.
Aren't they still accountable without bail? I mean, you know what, let's put up a quote. We have a quote from the former Chief Judge of the state, Jonathan Lippman, who had said, let's get that quote up on the screen, whether you're in jail for 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years, it's an accelerator of human misery. You can come out a changed human being. What if that person is innocent? What if there were extenuating circumstances? I mean, we don't want to prejudge that that person committed a crime. Certainly in this country, you're innocent until proven guilty, and you're saying they should maybe have a bail set that they can't pay. And then they go in and they are changed. I mean, again, Khalif Browder has been the poster child for it. He went in there. It turned out that the case was ultimately thrown out, but he was changed and ultimately committed suicide.
Bail is set in accordance with the person's ability to pay it. So the bail that would be set for someone like Harvey Weinstein would be very different than someone that committed a similar act that was on public assistance. It's one of these things that...
How much money would Harvey Weinstein not have paid? He'd have paid $5 million, right? It wouldn't have been an issue for him.
Right, but it's an interesting dynamic when you bring up Harvey Weinstein, but it goes back to bail is set in accordance to what your financial situation is. Harvey Weinstein is a far more affluent individual. Therefore, he would be more willing and have the ability to pay a higher bail than someone that's of a middle or a lower class. Mm-hmm. But it also goes back to this. This is going to be something that's going to be, you're not going to be able to quantitate it initially. I want to say that this is something that you're going to make the assessment on a year end. And that's when you're going to see how many people have quote unquote jumped bail. A lot of times people will come back when they're on bail because they have a surety attached to it and they feel that it's necessary for them to retrieve their money. And it goes back to the double victimization. We need to set forth a precedence of if you do something, and just going back to what you mentioned about people being innocent until proven guilty, everyone that's arrested is arrested on a standard of probable cause. Beyond a reasonable doubt is that standard of proof when you are in fact guilty. But when we look at probable cause, many of these defendants need to have an attachment to guarantee that that individual is going to show back up to court. And the NYPD's warrant squad is going to deal with an avalanche of people that are absconders because there was nothing to hold them to coming back to court.
Over the last significant amount of time, maybe 30 years, judges have cut cash bail drastically. I mean, there's certainly a lot less than there used to be. And there hasn't been a rise in seeing defendants who jump bail or skip court. So we'll, I guess over time that will ultimately be assessed. I want to bring in Ms. Esquenazi. And now you are obviously in the bail bonds industry. How much of your concern about this whole process is that it's the wrong thing to do versus you're just frankly and honestly and reasonably concerned about the state of your industry?
Well, of course, I'm concerned about the state of our industry because every successful criminal justice system throughout the United States of America operates within the realm of good suretyship and accountability in criminal release. We have for over 200 years. So, of course, I'm concerned about that particular issue, but much more so as a kid from Brooklyn, New York, I'm very concerned about the Jewish people. I'm very concerned about communities that walk around in garb, the LGBT community, for example, soft targets. I'm concerned about tourists to the city of New York. I'm concerned about Islamic people.
But listen, we're all nobody, certainly anybody in this room, and certainly the legislators who passed this reform would be concerned about any crime. The question is how to deal with crime. Would you be concerned about people who are incarcerated at Rikers Island for maybe even long periods of time? To me, a month, 2 months, 3 months can be a long period of time awaiting trial simply because they don't have the money to pay.
You know, Gary, that is such a good question. And let me tell you, a few years ago, I met with Mayor de Blasio's city council on criminal justice, and we were in the room, and I posed to them what's called a public-private partnership, where the bail bond industry said, you know what, we do it anyway at no cost to the taxpayer. We'll do it for you for a very small fee, whatever the effectuation fee is. And the city of New York, de Blasio's guys said, no, thank you. We got this. So I said, let me ask you one question, just one question, because he was a young man, a millennial, probably old enough to be my son. And I said to him, I have one question. When they fail to appear, who's going to go pick them up? Is that going to be borne on the taxpayer now? We have to create new warrant squads to go pick them up? Because currently I'm picking them up.
So now let me ask you this. Among the provisions in the legislation talks about putting electronic monitoring on people that the judges believe to be...
Gary, listen to me. This is the Bronx County, the Bronx County that you serve, and I'm from Brooklyn. We're very liberal counties. Cuban immigrants, gay people in my family. We're a very liberal family. And let me tell you something. This has nothing to do with the color of people's skin.
Wait, that's not the question I asked you, though. I asked you if there's because you brought up a point about your concern about who's going to bring them in and who's going to be accountability. If there is electronic monitoring and you know exactly where these people are, if a judge can order that and order supervised release, which apparently is going to be increased under this law, isn't that a reasonable way of ensuring that people come back and are trapped? That's not.
No, let me. Can I tell you why? Because what you're talking about is a virtual scarlet letter. People that are accused of nonviolent crime and misdemeanors, the government is essentially saying that those are the lower offenders. Why should they walk around with Big Brother watching did they go to the bathroom? They didn't go to the bathroom. They went to their drug program. They didn't go to their drug program. That's not what bail is. Bail is liberty.
Is that a worse?
Bail is the least restrictive condition.
Is that a worse scarlet letter than being put into Rikers Island and having the scars of living in Rikers Island?
Listen to me. Like Dr. Darrin Porcher said just now, in order for law enforcement to effectuate good arrests, there has to be something called probable cause. I walk down the streets every single day, and cops don't just randomly walk up to me and go, put your hands behind your back, palms up to the ceiling. It doesn't happen to me every single day. You know why? Because I don't go out and I don't commit crime. Crime is a choice. It is not a mandate.
Yes, but the judgment on that crime is in a courtroom, not by the police officer.
The problem here is you're letting people out of jail with no accountability. Mom and pop signed for little Johnny. Little Johnny is more vested to go to court, period.
Let me ask you this. You started out by saying, in this dialogue, by saying that you're concerned about, and all of us would be concerned about victims of anti-Semitism, of racism, of children, et cetera, et cetera. You were quoted in the city as saying, don't go with your friends to the ball drop on New Year's Eve. Make sure you have the pepper spray on the ready. Isn't that really just spreading fear-mongering? I'm not aware that there was any of that sort of violence, or this led to the notion of cash bail being removed led to any sort of running the people running wild on Times Square on New Year's Eve. That to me, frankly, is just fear-mongering, right?
Listen, fear-mongering is an excellent set of words, and they're probably branded. But at the end of the day, my suggestion would be to go to our Facebook page at the New York State Bail Bonds Agents Association and look at our pinned video. It's called The Purge. And that is, if you think that Recidivist Nation in New York City doesn't know about this free crime initiative, you're wrong. You must think again.
Is there a
people
Recidivist
that wake up
Nation?
and do sanitation jobs. There are people that wake up and do prosecutor jobs, coroner jobs, and then there are those that commit crime for a living.
Thank you. I mean, I've never heard the phrase recidivist nation. Excuse me. I don't even know that there is one like that. To me, I don't know. I don't even know what to make of that. Is there a recidivist nation? I mean, there may be
The fact
people
of
who
the
are.
matter is, rewarding recidivism in any society defies political ideology. You do not give gift cards and Met games. When your children do something bad, and I raised 4 of them as a single Cuban mother in the city of New York, okay, my children didn't get arrested because if they did something wrong, they had this little thing at home. It's called a consequence. And when you remove consequence and accountability from these young offenders in the city of New York, you're going to serve to embolden them. And that's why the Hasids are being, and the and Lubavitcher people are being attacked in my community in Brooklyn.
Listen, there's about a number of things. First of all, defining the reason that there's anti-Semitism as a result of criminals or potential criminals being
they
let
walk
out.
around in costumes, Gary. They're soft targets. Just
I understand that, but
Amish and certain. They're easy targets.
I understand that, but that doesn't mean that people who have not committed crime should go and sit in jail waiting for trial because they can't afford bail.
Maybe they shouldn't have done that.
But maybe they didn't do it. You're presuming. You're presuming that
our mortgage payment. If we don't pay the mortgage payment, the bank comes and takes the house. It's called accountability.
You're presuming that everybody who's arrested committed a crime. That's
I'm not presuming that, Gary. I've been doing what I do for 25 years. I've seen 1 million people get arrested for being in the wrong place at the wrong time or being with the wrong friends.
Right. So
that
should
has
those
nothing to
people?
Do with what I'm talking about. I am talking about a movement that is inappropriate for the public safety of the good people of the city of New York and the state.
Thank you. Dr. Porcher, let me ask you, you brought up the whole idea of assessing and the whole idea of risk assessment is also kind of a slippery slope because people can be judged outside of the specifics of their actions. Obviously, there's prejudice and other issues that would that could interfere with a reasonable judicial decision. What's your thought on risk assessment? This is something I'm sure that the Bronx DA is going to bring up when she comes here next week.
When we quantitate the number of arrests based on probable cause that amount to an innocent person being arrested, we do have a small fraction of people that are arrested as a result of that. But when we look at the gross majority of people that have been arrested will have committed these offenses. And but it gets to when we look
But you know, you're a police officer. You're not the judge and jury. You arrest somebody on probable cause. You bring them in, and then of course there's a justice system that deals with them. I mean, what I heard just a moment ago was sounded like prejudgments over. You know, there should be consequences. If they didn't do it, there should not be any consequence.
The consequence should just simply be arrest.
You bring forth a good point. An officer, it should be.
Michelle, hang on there.
A police officer should come from a place of neutrality. When I say a place of neutrality, meaning there's an assessment, okay, a person stated this person robbed me, and it appears to be credible, that person is taken into custody. Or a summary arrest. When I say a summary arrest, meaning an officer makes an observation and assesses that this person committed a crime. That is probable cause in a nutshell. But what's interestingly enough, deceased Supreme Court Justice Scalia stated once that he would have a difficult time assessing probable cause if he was in the back seat of a police car, which goes back to this is something that's done on a case-by-case basis by the officer. But I'm not saying that a person they're automatically guilty, but it's enough to get the ball rolling in the criminal justice system if the officer assesses that there's probable cause.
But then the judge ultimately has to make the assessment, because again, we're talking about bail. We're not talking about ultimate
In arraignments, that's correct.
That's right. So then the judge has to make a determination on, and there are very specific guidelines in the legislation that says certain types of crime will require electronic monitoring, requiring supervised release, those kinds of things. Aren't those sufficient to make, or are those sufficient to make sure that you don't get the kind of recidivism that Ms. Esquenazi was concerned about?
I'm okay with electronic monitoring and several other provisions that are in play.
Right.
But this appears as if it's a tidal wave that the city is looking to open up for the majority of these arrests, resulting in a person not receiving a bail. I think that a bail should be an anchor, and it should also act as a deterrent for people going out and committing these offenses. In no way, shape, or form am I advocating that this person is guilty, but it's a mere provision that a person would encounter when they're going through arraignments. And arraignments is that component that you mentioned earlier in connection with the judge that makes the assessment if this is credible enough to move forward in the criminal justice system, or we can vacate this on the spot.
Ms. Esquenazi, given where we are now, I mean, we can't say don't do this because the legislation has happened. What do you recommend that, whether it be the state or city, what do you recommend is done right now to fix inequities that you are concerned about?
Well, I have to tell you that it's just my feeling that Governor Cuomo was really not given the best information as it pertains to this issue, because last year in his State of the State speech, Governor Cuomo said, and I quote, New York State has the most liberal bail statute in the nation. We were already releasing at a 70% arraignment rate in New York County. So the fact of the matter is he was correct. We did have the proper bail system in place. What the legislature did in this case was it essentially usurped the judicial branch and basically tied the hands of the judiciary. So they need to, change some of the phraseology in the legislation to give judges back the ability to judge things on a case-by-case basis. For example, when an accused is arraigned right now today, if he raped someone yesterday, the judge is no longer allowed to take into account that he saw him yesterday for a rape arraignment. So he's no longer allowed to look at the rap sheet. If the defendant fails to appear, he has 48 hours before he's allowed to issue a bench warrant, essentially giving that defendant a head start. So there's really a lot of little things that need to be tweaked to protect the public safety.
Again, I could go back to, you don't want to hear about electronic monitoring or supervised release, which are all part of the legislation. I'm waiting to hear about your concern about people who end up going to jail, who waiting trial, who ultimately get found innocent and they're scarred for life because they've been sitting in jail. Do you have concern for those people?
What the city of New York, or the state rather of New York, essentially needs to do with something like that is similar that when you need a welfare benefit, like for example, when I was on public assistance as a single mom, there was a system of checks and balances. In other words, you can't be driving a Bentley and get public assistance. So there was a system of checks and balance whereby you had to quantify, whether or not you were indigent, essentially. So the fact of the matter is, if the city of New York or the state would implement something of that, then I'm sure that all the indigent would be addressed properly. As it pertains to Khalif Browder, he should rest in peace. But the fact of the matter is, legal aid failed Khalif Browder, and he also had a probation hold. And they just never litigated for him. They never stood for him properly.
Yeah, listen, we know the numerous failures that went on with that case. But again, I'm still not hearing you say it's not fair for somebody who did not commit a crime to go to jail while they wait a court case. And in some cases, given the state of our court system, can be a very long time.
Yeah, I probably repeat things differently. I don't essentially like to repeat their branded rhetoric from the other side. So what I would say is,
I'm looking for rhetoric. I just asked you a question.
That you will avoid the criminal justice system if you don't get arrested.
Yeah, yes, I guess that's the case. Dr. Porcher, did you want to respond to that?
You bring up a good point. Innocent people should never come into the custody of the criminal justice system. Now, I'm a firm believer in quintessential policing should be at the apex of this. When I say quintessential policing, meaning there should be not just the officer making the arrest based on probable cause, but a supervisor should also review what occurred. There should be different levels that an arrest should go through. And traditionally, that's the case because, like, it goes back to the gross majority of these people that are arrested have, in fact, committed those offenses. But I'm a strong proponent in stating that one innocent person arrested is too much, especially when it's a relative or a child of mine.
Anybody.
So it goes back to how can we revolutionize the component of policing? And I think that's something that's ever so evolving, but we can't take away the fact that there should be a level of accountability established for someone that is taken into custody.
Before we run out of time, let me put out, actually, today the Daily News had an editorial called Reform the Reform, and they were talking about taking a new look at it and saying some crimes or some accusations could be handled differently in the bail system. You think that is, and we'll ask Ms. Esquenazi the same thing. You think that's a reform? You like that reform? You like that idea?
I'm okay with any level of
redefining the crime?
I'm okay with any level of reform that keeps us as a society safe. And that is at the apex of the way I view it.
You think that would be a legislative reform that could work?
It's such a deciduous state that we need to review it. We need to view it through a
You want to see it in
lens.
writing before you say yes,
Right.
I believe. Ms. Esquenazi, you get the final word. Do you think what the Daily News proposed today is a good idea?
I believe that the legislature is super smart and everybody's going to get together in a bipartisan way and kumbaya, and we're going to fix it. And it'll be great for criminal justice reform, which is necessary. And hopefully the indigent will not linger in incarceration through a system of checks and balances that's simple and easy to quantify, and that we move forward and we become the defining state for this issue as opposed to the black eye state, because that's where we are right now.
Not everybody will agree, and we'll ask the Bronx DA that next week. Ms. Esquenazi, thank you. I know that you you've been away, and that you still made the time to join us on Skype, and we appreciate your time today.
God bless New York. Stay safe,
That's
everyone.
it. We all agree. And Dr. Porcher, we'll have you back. You always come back, and we
I look
appreciate
forward
it.
to it. Thank you for having me as a guest.
Folks, if you have further questions or comments, and who doesn't have comments on this, on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org. You can send us a tweet at BronxTalk or post them on our Facebook page. As I mentioned earlier, next week we'll continue the discussion on bail reform and other criminal justice issues with Bronx DA Darcel Clark. Thanks to our producer, Helen Greenberg. Nick Marrero is our director, the cast of thousands who did a great job here. We'll see you next week. Good night.